Something inside you has already begun to change, and you can feel it. The things that once helped you survive now feel heavy. The way you used to think, react, and protect yourself no longer brings you peace, and this can feel confusing, even unsettling. But understand this clearly: the version of you that survived was never meant to stay. There was a version of you that carried you through pain, that held you together when things were falling apart, and that version was necessary for that time. But now something deeper is happening. What once protected you is no longer needed, because you were not created just to survive. You were created to transform, to grow, and to step into who you were always meant to be. So if you feel like parts of you are fading, do not fear it. This is not your ending. This is your becoming. Survival was a phase, not your identity. There is a version of you that learned how to endure. It formed quietly, shaped by pressure, uncertainty, and moments where strength was the only option. That version became alert, careful, and protective. It learned how to respond quickly, how to guard itself from harm, and how to continue moving forward even when everything felt unstable. It was not created out of comfort, but out of necessity. This survival self was intelligent in its own way. It understood what needed to be done to keep you steady. It built habits that helped you navigate difficulty. It created emotional defenses so you would not collapse under the weight of what you were facing. Every reaction, every guarded thought, every instinct to protect yourself had a purpose. Nothing about it was meaningless. It carried you through what you could not yet fully understand. But survival is not meant to become a permanent state of being. What once protected you can begin to shape your entire identity if it remains unexamined. The patterns that were useful during difficult times can quietly become limitations when life begins to shift. The same guarded thinking that kept you safe can start closing you off from deeper connection. The same alertness that helped you endure can begin creating tension even when there is no immediate danger. This is where confusion begins to appear inside the heart. You may start noticing that the way you respond to life no longer feels natural. Reactions that once made sense begin to feel heavy. Certain thoughts repeat themselves even when they no longer reflect your current reality. The mind continues operating from a place of protection, while the soul begins seeking something more open and peaceful. This tension is not a mistake. It is a sign that your identity is no longer meant to be built on survival. The deeper self within you is beginning to separate from the version that was created to endure. It recognizes that while survival was necessary, it was only one chapter in a much larger journey. The strength you developed was real, but it was not the final form of who you are meant to become. When this realization begins to settle, it can feel unfamiliar. Letting go of survival patterns may seem risky at first. The mind may resist change because those patterns once ensured safety. Even if they no longer serve you, they feel known and predictable. Stepping beyond them requires trust in something that has not yet fully taken shape. Yet growth cannot happen while holding on to an identity that was built for a different time. To move forward, the heart begins releasing the belief that it must always remain in a state of defense. It starts allowing itself to experience life without constant tension. It becomes open to new ways of thinking, feeling, and responding. This shift does not erase what you have been through. It simply transforms how that experience lives within you. You begin to understand that you are not defined by the version of yourself that struggled to survive. You are defined by what you are becoming beyond it. The survival self was real. It was necessary. It served its purpose with strength and resilience. But it was never meant to be the final version of you. It was a bridge, not a destination. And now, something deeper is asking you to step beyond it. What protected you can now limit you. There was a time when your mind learned how to protect you in very specific ways. It built responses designed to reduce pain, avoid conflict, and maintain a sense of control. These patterns were not random. They were carefully formed through experience, shaped by what you faced and how you adapted. Every guarded reaction, every cautious thought, and every emotional boundary had a clear purpose: to keep you safe. Protection often begins as a form of intelligence. The mind observes what hurts and quickly creates a system to prevent that pain from repeating. It learns when to withdraw, when to stay silent, and when to build distance. These responses become familiar, and with repetition, they begin to feel like part of who you are. Yet something subtle begins to change when the environment around you is no longer the same. The patterns that once kept you safe may continue operating even when the original danger is no longer present. The mind continues to protect, even when there is nothing left to defend against. This creates a quiet tension within the heart. You may begin to notice that certain reactions feel automatic rather than intentional. The protection remains, but the purpose behind it begins to fade. This is where limitation quietly takes shape. What once served as a shield can begin to act as a barrier. The same emotional distance that helped you avoid harm may now prevent you from forming deeper connections. The same caution that once guided you through uncertainty may now hold you back from opportunities that require openness. Protection, when it stays beyond its time, begins to restrict movement rather than support it. The difficulty is that these patterns feel familiar. They are known. They have history. The mind trusts them because they worked before. Even when they begin to feel heavy, letting go of them can create uncertainty. The question begins to form inside: if these protections are removed, what takes their place? This question is part of the transformation. Growth does not begin by removing protection without awareness. It begins by recognizing that protection must evolve. The heart starts understanding that strength is not only found in defense, but also in openness, balance, and clarity. What once required constant guarding now asks for a different kind of response. You may begin to feel this shift in subtle ways. Situations that once triggered strong reactions may now invite a pause instead. Conversations that once led to withdrawal may now create a desire for understanding. The mind starts noticing that it no longer wants to operate only from protection, but from presence. This change can feel unfamiliar because it requires releasing control over patterns that once felt necessary. Yet this is where a deeper strength begins to emerge. Instead of reacting from old defenses, the heart begins responding with awareness. Instead of closing itself off, it starts allowing space for new experiences to unfold. The energy that was once used to maintain protection becomes available for growth, connection, and clarity. This does not mean becoming unguarded in a careless way. It means becoming conscious of when protection is needed and when it is no longer serving you. The heart learns to distinguish between real danger and inherited patterns that no longer reflect your current reality. What protected you was never wrong. It was essential for the time it was created. But as you continue to grow, holding on to the same protection can prevent you from stepping into a fuller version of yourself. The barrier that once kept you safe can begin to separate you from the life you are now ready to experience. And as this realization settles within you, something begins to shift. You no longer see your protective patterns as permanent. You begin to see them as something that can be transformed. Because what once protected you was never meant to define the limits of who you can become. Growth feels like losing control. When change begins to unfold within you, one of the first sensations that often appears is a subtle loss of control. The patterns you once relied on no longer feel stable. The thoughts that once guided your decisions begin to lose their certainty. The structure you built to navigate life starts to shift, and the mind reacts by trying to hold everything together. Control has always served a purpose. It creates a sense of stability. It allows the mind to feel prepared, to anticipate outcomes, and to avoid uncertainty. When life feels unpredictable, control becomes a way to manage fear. It gives the impression that everything can be organized, contained, and directed in a way that prevents discomfort. But growth introduces something unfamiliar. It begins to loosen the grip of control. The mind starts realizing that not everything can be predicted or managed in the same way. Situations begin to unfold in ways that cannot be fully planned. Emotional responses shift. Old strategies stop producing the same results. This creates a feeling of instability, as if the ground beneath you is no longer as solid as it once seemed. This experience can feel unsettling. The instinct is to regain control, to return to what feels familiar, to re-establish the patterns that once created certainty. The mind searches for answers, for clarity, for something to hold on to. It wants to restore order as quickly as possible. Yet what is happening is not a loss in the way it appears. It is a transition. The version of you that depended on control is beginning to give way to a version that moves with awareness instead of constant management. The need to control every outcome starts to dissolve because something deeper is developing within you, the ability to remain steady even when outcomes are uncertain. This is where growth becomes difficult to recognize, because it does not always feel like progress. It can feel like confusion. It can feel like instability. It can feel like something is slipping away. But what is actually shifting is your relationship with control itself. You begin to notice that control was often tied to fear, fear of uncertainty, fear of discomfort, fear of not knowing what comes next. As that fear begins to loosen, the need for control weakens as well. The mind starts allowing space for things to unfold rather than forcing them into a fixed structure. This does not mean becoming passive or careless. It means learning a different form of strength. Instead of controlling every situation, you begin to trust your ability to respond to whatever arises. Instead of trying to predict every outcome, you become present with what is happening now. This presence creates a stability that is not dependent on controlling external circumstances. The feeling of losing control is therefore not a collapse. It is a reorientation. The foundation of your identity begins shifting from external control to internal awareness. The mind no longer needs to hold everything tightly. The heart begins to carry a quiet confidence that does not depend on certainty. As this shift continues, something unexpected begins to appear. A different kind of peace. Not the peace that comes from having everything planned, but the peace that comes from not needing everything to be planned. A calmness that exists even when life remains uncertain. You begin to realize that control was never the true source of stability. It was only a temporary method of coping. And as you release the need to control every detail, you discover a deeper form of strength, the ability to move through life with awareness, flexibility, and trust. Growth may feel like something is slipping away, but what is actually happening is that something more stable is being built beneath the surface. And the control you thought you needed is slowly being replaced by a deeper form of understanding. The inner shift happens before the outer change. Before anything in your life begins to visibly change, something subtle starts moving within you. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not immediately alter your circumstances. Instead, it begins as a quiet shift in the way you think, feel, and respond. The outer world may remain exactly the same, yet inside, something no longer fits the way it once did. This inner movement can be difficult to explain. You may still be surrounded by the same people, engaged in the same routines, and walking through the same environments. From the outside, nothing appears different. Yet the way you experience these same situations begins to change. Thoughts that once felt certain begin to feel incomplete. Reactions that once felt automatic begin to slow down. The heart starts questioning patterns it once followed without hesitation. This is where transformation truly begins. Not in visible action, but in invisible awareness. The mind starts observing itself. You begin to notice how you respond to certain situations, how you interpret events, and how your emotions move beneath the surface. This observation creates space. Instead of reacting instantly, you begin to pause. Instead of following familiar patterns, you begin to see them. That moment of seeing is the beginning of change. Because once you become aware of something, you can no longer move through it unconsciously. This inner shift often feels subtle, but its impact is deep. The things that once felt important may begin to lose their intensity. Conversations that once held your attention may now feel repetitive. Certain environments may start to feel misaligned with your current state of mind. You may not yet know what needs to change, but you can clearly feel that something already has. This creates a sense of tension. The outer world continues as it always has, but the inner world no longer responds in the same way. There is a quiet gap between who you were and who you are becoming. This gap can feel uncertain because it does not yet have a clear direction. Yet this uncertainty carries meaning. It is the space where transformation is forming. The inner shift prepares you for the outer change. It reshapes your perception before it reshapes your circumstances. It allows you to see what no longer aligns before anything is removed or replaced. Without this inner awareness, any external change would feel forced or unstable. You begin to notice that your reactions are changing. Situations that once triggered strong responses may now feel less intense. You may find yourself choosing silence where you once reacted quickly. You may feel less drawn to certain habits or patterns that once defined your daily life. These changes are not always dramatic, but they are consistent. They signal that something deeper is reorganizing within you. The mind is no longer operating from the same framework. The heart is no longer attached to the same responses. You begin to recognize that your identity is shifting, even if your environment has not yet caught up with that change. This is where patience becomes essential, because the outer world moves more slowly than the inner one. The changes inside you may be immediate, but the external reflection of those changes takes time to unfold. Relationships, environments, and circumstances begin adjusting gradually, aligning with the new awareness that is forming within you. Trying to force outer change before the inner shift is complete often leads to confusion. The foundation has not yet settled, the clarity has not fully formed. But when the inner transformation is allowed to develop naturally, the outer changes begin to follow with greater stability. You begin to trust this process. You no longer feel the need to rush visible outcomes. You understand that what is happening inside you is more important than what appears outside. The quiet shifts in perception, the subtle changes in thought, and the growing awareness within your heart are already reshaping your direction. The outer world will eventually reflect this, but it will do so in its own time. And when it does, the changes will feel natural rather than forced. They will align with who you have already become internally. Because transformation does not begin with what the world can see. It begins with what only you can feel. And once that inner shift takes place, the outer change becomes inevitable. You start releasing what you once needed. A quiet change begins when the heart recognizes that certain things no longer belong to its current state. What once felt necessary, even essential, starts to feel heavy. Habits, attachments, and ways of thinking that once provided comfort begin to lose their place. This does not happen through force, it happens through awareness. The need slowly fades, and with it, the attachment begins to loosen. This can feel confusing. The mind may question why something that once helped you now feels out of place. You may try to return to it, hoping it will bring the same sense of stability it once did. But the experience feels different. The connection is no longer the same. What once felt supportive now feels restrictive, as if it no longer fits the direction you are moving in. This is not a loss in the way it appears. It is a release. The heart begins to understand that not everything is meant to stay. Some things enter your life to serve a purpose for a specific period. They help you navigate certain challenges, support you during difficult times, and give you the strength to continue. But once that purpose is fulfilled, holding on to them becomes unnecessary. This realization does not always come with immediate clarity. There may be hesitation. The mind may resist letting go because it associates these things with safety and familiarity. Even when they no longer serve you, they represent something known. Releasing them can feel like stepping into uncertainty. Yet the shift continues. You begin to notice that your attention naturally moves away from what once held it. You no longer feel the same pull toward certain behaviors or patterns. The desire begins to dissolve on its own, without effort. This is a sign that the change is genuine, not forced. Letting go in this way is different from rejection. It is not about pushing something away or deciding that it is no longer valuable. It is about recognizing that it has completed its role in your life. The heart begins to make space, not out of resistance, but out of readiness for something new. This space can feel unfamiliar at first. When something leaves, it creates a gap. The mind may try to fill it quickly, to replace what has been released with something similar. But growth invites you to sit with that space for a moment, to allow it to exist without rushing to close it. Within that space, something begins to form. A different kind of clarity emerges. You start understanding yourself beyond the patterns you once relied on. The identity that was built around those needs begins to shift. You are no longer defined by what you held onto for stability. Instead, you begin to experience a sense of lightness. The weight of maintaining what no longer belongs to you starts to lift. The energy that was once used to hold on to these things becomes available for something else. You begin to move with less resistance, less tension, and more openness. This release also changes how you relate to the past. You no longer feel the need to carry everything forward. You understand that growth includes both holding on and letting go. What mattered before is still part of your journey, but it does not need to define your present. The heart begins to trust this process. It understands that releasing what is no longer needed is not a loss of self, but a refinement of it. Each layer that falls away brings you closer to something more aligned, more honest, and more stable. You are not becoming empty. You are becoming clear. And as you continue to release what once felt necessary, you begin to recognize that you are making space for a version of yourself that no longer depends on what you needed before. Because what you are becoming requires less holding on and more letting go. You no longer react the same way. A quiet shift begins to appear in the way you respond to life. Situations that once triggered immediate reactions start to feel different. The same words, the same environments, the same types of interactions occur, yet something within you no longer moves in the same direction. There is a pause where there used to be urgency. There is space where there used to be intensity. This change can feel unfamiliar at first. You may notice that things which once caused frustration, fear, or defensiveness no longer carry the same weight. The reaction that once felt automatic begins to slow down. Instead of responding instantly, you observe. Instead of being pulled into the emotion, you become aware of it. This is not a loss of feeling. It is a change in how feeling moves through you. Previously, reactions may have come from patterns shaped by past experiences. The mind learned to respond quickly in order to protect itself, to maintain control, or to avoid discomfort. These reactions were efficient. They required no pause, no reflection. They operated as part of a system designed for survival. Now that system is changing. You begin to see the reaction before it fully takes over. A moment of awareness appears between the trigger and the response. In that moment, something new becomes possible. You are no longer bound to repeat the same pattern. You can choose how to respond. This choice is subtle but powerful. It does not always feel like strength at first. It may feel like hesitation, like uncertainty, like something is missing. The familiar intensity of reaction is no longer there, and the mind may interpret this as weakness. But what is actually happening is the emergence of control at a deeper level. Not control over the external situation, but control over your internal response. You begin to realize that reacting immediately was never the only option. It was simply the most familiar one. Now, with awareness, you are able to step outside of that pattern. You can experience the situation without becoming consumed by it. This creates a different kind of presence. You are still engaged with life, but not in the same reactive way. You listen more carefully, you observe more clearly. You allow situations to unfold without rushing to respond from emotion alone. This shift also changes how others experience you. People may notice that you are calmer, less easily affected by tension or conflict. Situations that once escalated quickly may now pass without the same intensity. Your responses carry more clarity and less emotional weight. This does not mean you become distant or disconnected. It means you become grounded. You are no longer pulled in every direction by external triggers. Your sense of stability begins to come from within rather than from controlling the outside world. At times, this new way of responding can feel quiet. The mind may question whether something is missing because the old patterns were louder, more immediate, more intense. But with time, you begin to recognize that what has changed is not your ability to respond, but the quality of your response. It becomes more intentional, more aware, more aligned with who you are becoming. This transformation is one of the clearest signs that the survival self is fading. The version of you that needed to react quickly is no longer leading your behavior. In its place, a deeper awareness is guiding your responses. You are no longer moving through life on automatic patterns. You are present. And within that presence, you discover that true strength is not found in how quickly you react, but in how consciously you choose not to. Silence becomes a place of strength. A quiet shift begins to change your relationship with silence. What once felt uncomfortable or empty starts to feel steady and grounding. The need to fill every moment with words, distractions, or constant activity begins to fade. Instead of searching for noise, you begin to notice that silence carries something deeper, a sense of clarity that cannot be found in constant movement. In earlier moments, silence may have felt like something to avoid. It could bring up thoughts that were easier to ignore, or emotions that felt too heavy to face. Keeping busy, speaking often, or surrounding yourself with activity created a sense of control. Noise became a way to stay ahead of what was happening inside. Now something begins to change. Silence no longer feels like a space you need to escape. It becomes a space you can enter without resistance. When everything around you becomes quiet, the mind does not immediately rush to fill the gap. Instead, it begins to settle. Thoughts slow down. The constant pressure to react, respond, and engage starts to ease. You begin to experience a different kind of stillness, one that is not empty, but full of awareness. This shift reveals something important. Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something deeper. Within silence, you begin to notice yourself more clearly. Without distraction, The patterns of your thoughts become visible. The emotions that once moved quickly beneath the surface begin to reveal themselves without intensity. You are no longer overwhelmed by them because you are observing rather than reacting. This creates a sense of strength that is different from anything built on action or control. It is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It simply remains steady. You begin to understand that strength does not always come from speaking, defending, or asserting yourself. Sometimes it comes from not needing to respond immediately, from allowing space before words, from choosing presence instead of reaction. Silence also changes how you listen. When you are no longer focused on what you will say next, you begin to hear more clearly, not just the words of others, but the tone, the intention, and the meaning behind them. Conversations become deeper because you are no longer filling them with unnecessary noise. This awareness extends beyond interaction. In quiet moments, you begin to reflect without pressure. You are able to sit with thoughts without needing to resolve them instantly. This patience allows understanding to develop naturally without forcing conclusions. Silence becomes a place where you reconnect with yourself. Not the version of you that was shaped by reaction, expectation, or external influence, but the part of you that exists beneath all of that. The part that remains steady even when everything around you changes. This is where the strength of silence becomes clear. It gives you space to respond rather than react. It gives you clarity without confusion. It allows you to remain grounded, even in situations that once would have unsettled you. Others may not always understand this shift. In a world that often values constant expression, silence can be mistaken for withdrawal. But for you, it is not withdrawal. It is alignment. It is the ability to remain centered without needing to engage in every moment. You begin to trust silence. You no longer feel the need to explain everything, to defend every thought, or to respond to every situation. You understand that not every moment requires your voice. Some moments require your presence. And in that presence, something powerful emerges. A calm that does not depend on external conditions. A stability that is not easily shaken. A strength that does not need to be seen to exist. Silence becomes more than a pause between words. It becomes a place you can return to. A place where you gather clarity. A place where you remain steady. A place where you find strength without effort. And within that silence, you begin to realize that the most powerful version of you is not the one that reacts the loudest, but the one that can remain still, aware, and grounded when everything else is moving. Becoming requires letting go of who you were. A quiet truth begins to reveal itself as you continue to change. You cannot fully become who you are meant to be while holding on to who you used to be. The identity you once carried was shaped by circumstances, experiences, and the need to survive. It was real, and it served a purpose, but it was never meant to remain unchanged. Letting go of who you were does not mean rejecting your past. It means understanding that it was only one part of your journey, not the final definition of your identity. The thoughts you once believed, the reactions you once had, and the ways you once saw yourself were all shaped by a different version of your life. As your awareness begins to shift, those old definitions start to feel less aligned. The person you used to be no longer reflects the direction your inner self is moving toward. This can create a sense of tension because the familiar identity still feels close even as it begins to fade. The mind often resists this process. It tries to hold on to what it knows. It may remind you of who you were, of how you used to think, and of the patterns that once made you feel stable. Familiarity creates comfort even when it no longer supports your growth. This is where letting go becomes necessary, not through force, but through understanding. You begin to see that holding on to an old identity limits your ability to move forward. The habits, beliefs, and reactions that once defined you start to feel like boundaries rather than support. They no longer allow you to experience life with the same openness that your new awareness is inviting. Letting go is not always easy. It can feel like losing something that once felt essential. Even if that version of you was shaped by difficulty, it is still part of your history. Releasing it can create a sense of uncertainty, as if you are stepping into something undefined. But this space of uncertainty carries meaning. It is not emptiness. It is transition. In this space, you are no longer confined to who you were, but you are not yet fully defined by who you are becoming. This in-between state can feel unfamiliar, but it is where transformation takes place. You begin to notice small changes in how you see yourself. The labels you once carried begin to lose their hold. The stories you told yourself about your identity start to dissolve. You are no longer bound to the same definitions. You are no longer limited by the same patterns. This creates freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from external change, but the kind that comes from internal release. You are no longer trying to fit into an identity that no longer represents you. You are allowing yourself to exist without forcing a fixed definition. As this process continues, something deeper begins to form. A new sense of self that is not built on survival, but on awareness. A way of being that is not shaped by past limitations, but by present clarity. This new version of you does not need to hold on to old patterns to feel secure. It moves with a different kind of stability. A stability that comes from understanding rather than control. Letting go also changes how you relate to your past. You no longer see it as something you must carry forward in the same way. Instead, it becomes something you have learned from. It remains part of your story, but it does not define your direction. You begin to trust that releasing who you were is not a loss. It is a necessary step in becoming who you are meant to be. The identity you once held served its purpose. It brought you through what you needed to experience. But now, something new is asking to emerge, and it cannot fully appear while the old version still holds its place. So, you begin to release it. Not with resistance, not with fear, but with understanding. Because you realize that becoming is not about adding more to yourself. It is about allowing what no longer belongs to fall away. And in that release, you make space for something more aligned, more aware, and more true to who you are becoming. And so, if you feel like something within you is ending, do not rush to fix it and not try to return to who you were, just because it feels familiar. That version of you served its purpose. It carried you through what you once could not handle, but it was never meant to stay forever. What you are experiencing now is not emptiness. It is space. Space for something deeper to emerge. Space for a version of you that is no longer built on survival, but on awareness, trust, and inner strength. You are not losing yourself. You are being gently guided beyond a version that is no longer needed. So let it fall away, without fear, without resistance, because what is leaving you is making room for who you are truly becoming.